Welcome to the Tripod, where we break down the NRL every game, every week from a punting perspective. I'm Jacob Wynn. This is the Round 12 preview. Last week we went 1-2 on the best bets. We won a $3.50 mixed matchup. We lost a couple of multis. For the season, we are 63%, 28 and 16 on best bets, I believe. Still very good winning clip, and we're up, I think, just over $1,200 if you're having 100 as an example stake on every best bet and mixed matchup. I'm not saying you should have 100 on them all, just to keep a record that you can easily visualize of how the tips are going overall. Now look, the new rules, there's been so much discussion on them. If you want my thoughts on how the new rules will affect footy, the pros and the cons, and how to take advantage punting, I went into that in depth for the first 10 minutes of the round 10 recap, and my thoughts that I shared then have still proven to be true. I also talked in round 11, I answered a question, have the new rules made betting on the NRL harder? My answer was yes, and I kind of went into that on the recap. And of course, the recaps are where I face the music for losses. So again, we went 1-2 on best bets. That's not good enough last week. So I did a self-critique of my picks, particularly getting that South Panthers game so wrong. So I'm not going to repeat myself. That the recap is where you kind of get the deep dive into the round that's been. There have been a lot of people talking that the game is ruined, or they're going to boycott watching or attending. They're saying they no longer watch, they're no longer going to bet. I'm not going to add to the complaining. The truth is, look, there's no going back from these new rules. Once you come out and say we're going to cut down on head injuries and we're going to make the game safer, you simply can't backtrack that, because now you've acknowledged that you believe the high shots are causing a problem. So the NRL has made this decision, so there's no real point complaining about it as far as I'm concerned. You know, I'd love to think that maybe in the future they can refine these rulings, maybe tweak it where accidental contact can be ruled a bit less harshly. But there's really, my point is just like, let's adapt. We still love the NRL. I mean, at least I still do, and I'm up for the challenge of trying to beat the NRL in this new era. And it is a bit unprecedented. We've got totals and lines that I've never seen before this season. But the truth is, when there's fundamental changes in a sport, that's actually also opportunity for punters, because when there's uncertainty about how something's going to play out, it's harder for the bookies to price, and therefore there can be opportunities where we can find to oppose them. So I've got lots of opinions and lots of and a couple of best bets for round 12. In terms of the number of best bets, I've just got 3 on just 2 different games. I'm treading carefully, I guess, in that regard, because of these kind of new circumstances. But still, I'll share you my best bets now, as I always do in the first 5 minutes. And then when we get through the games, I'll talk about a few other games that had a really strong lean and which directions, and even a couple of totals I was looking at. Remember, these are my best bets. They don't have to be yours. If you disagree, if yours are different, or if yours are completely opposite, I encourage everyone to share their opinion. But I am going, first of all, in Panthers Dogs to best bet time of first try, 0 to 7.59. So basically a try in the first 8 minutes, $1.82 on Ladbrokes and Neds. This match is the highest line I've ever seen all my years punting on the NRL, and I can't really disagree with it. You've got Penrith's team total expected to exceed 40 points in this match. It's an afternoon game. It's Penrith's home ground. You know, when you bet yes or no for a try in the first 8, it's always a bit of a dice roll. I can't come out and say it's a lock. But I believe this is value, and I believe that this is worth taking, and it'd be one of the first times I've ever bet yes on this market in the history of the pod. Because when you have a favourite that's an unprecedentedly high favourite, when you have a total that's one of the highest I've ever seen, historically high, and the ball is in play longer and the clock stops more often when the ball is out of play, so there's more actual opportunity for scoring, I don't think the bookies can adjust quite enough, and therefore I think this is a great opportunity. I watched Penrith play against Souths, and they're just ruthless, and you know, they were up 10-0 against Souths, got a penalty, didn't take the 2. They just keep their foot to the gas, so I wouldn't expect Penrith to give up any opportunities if they do get any attacking opportunities early. I'm going to get into it in the actual game preview about how many Panthers are auditioning for Origin. And another reason I know this is a good bet, because I've seen other bookies, you can bet on when Panthers will score their first try, and under 7.5 minutes is just for the Panthers, and it's priced a fair bit lower than this. And of course, we have a possibility that the Dogs could score in the first 8 minutes. I mean, it's not likely, but if you look at the odds, they're 50-50 to score in the first half. So for the Dogs to score first 8 minutes, it's still significant, like 5 to 10% chance off an intercept, off a bomb, off a deflected kick, who knows. So it's a bonus chance there that we get to win that bet. Plus, it's a fun one to cheer. Not that you bet something because it's fun, but it's just a bonus as well. And secondly, the match that I've got, my other two best bets is Knights hosting Manly, and I'm taking the Knights plus 12.5, $1.85 on Unibet. You can also get $12.5, $1.80 on Toppy, or plus 12, $1.90 on Ladbrokes and Neds. And I'm going to bet the Manly Sea Eagles team total under 32.5 points, and that's $1.80 on Bet365. And I know a lot of you guys are going to cringe hearing that I'm on the Knights again, but it is a huge game for them. For one, off another poor performance, that maybe they had a couple of excuses, but essentially, you lose to a side that you're battling to make the 8 with in the Cowboys last weekend on the Thursday night. That does give you 10 full days to come home and prepare for an opponent that you expect nothing but a flying opposition coming up against you, so you've got to be better. And one area, once again, and I do say this a lot, but I do believe the Knights win the forward battle, and maybe I'm giving Newcastle's forwards too much credit, because as experienced and talented as they are, I think Clemmer's knee is not 100%, and I think they're very one-dimensional. They never seem to want to pass the footy, but still, give me the Knights pack over the Manly pack. I think Brayley's the better hooker, and the deficiencies for the Knights, where they've really struggled in the recent weeks, has been missing Ponga, missing Bradman Best. They're both back in this team. It adds strike to the back line and staunches up the defense and helps with organisation from KP at the back there. And when you've got more game breakers and more threat in attack, and quality, that actually helps your defense, because you're going to be in the game more and you're not going to be having your backs against the wall the whole game. Now, look, this is not really a bet against Manly. Manly are on an absolute roll. Maybe their best performance of the season was last week. I'm going to talk all about Manly and just how good I think they are, and I'm going to get Tristan to touch on that too. But even last week when Manly smashed Para, they didn't score 30 points in that one. So a lot of respect for them and how they're going. And if you don't trust the Knights, you probably keep off these best bets, but I just think it's a kitchen sink game at home for them. I don't actually think the Knights should be double-digit underdogs, so getting that 2 converted tries and a hook is nice, and I don't think they're going to give up over 32 points. Okay, so now I'll share my overall my in-depth thoughts for each of the 8 games, including several where I was close to a best bet, just haven't pulled the trigger quite yet. But first, let's check in with Tristan from TopSport with Market Watch. It's going to tell you where the big line moves have already been for round 12, as well as touch on the premiership market and talk about the kind of power 5 or 6 clubs in the competition and what the gap is.
Hi punters, it's Tristan Merlehan here from TopSport. We had a few interesting results there on the weekend, in particular the Broncos getting the big upset over the Roosters. So we move into round 12 with a very good round of footy actually. The 2 biggest moves of the weekend have actually been on the 2 short price favourites. So the Storm have gone from 18.5 out to 20.5. Where the punters are expecting them to get the result quite comfortably over the Broncos. And the other big move has been the Panthers moving from 31.5 to 35.5 against the hapless Bulldogs. All the other games have been pretty steady in betting so far. Looking at the premiership market, in terms of how we rate the sides at the moment, in terms of the rating, highest rating team and whatnot, we've got the Panthers at $2.70 favourite, Melbourne at $3.70. There is a significant gap between them in the regular season at the moment, despite a close enough betting in terms of the premiership. The reason being is the Storm would be expected to lift come the finals time. Penrith haven't been there yet, or they have been there and they've lost, obviously, where Melbourne have got the record there. So I'd probably feel that if Penrith played Melbourne tomorrow, you'd probably have an indication where maybe Penrith start 6-point favourites at home in a regular season game. Obviously, that's a lot tighter in a finals match. We've got the Eels and Souths both at $7.50, so that'd be equally rated teams in third, and I think betting illustrates that this weekend, where the Bunnies go in slight favourites against the Eels, obviously at home. So if that game was at Parramatta, you'd probably expect the Eels to start slight favourites. And then the fifth ranked team in the betting for the premiership is the Roosters. They're $12. Manly would be the fifth hottest team, maybe even closer in the regular season. They're at $16, but obviously they've got a bit of ground to make up. And the Roosters, if they happen to get to the finals, or when they get to the finals, you'd expect a few of their players to come back into contention. They'll be a force to be reckoned with. Right, punters, go well this weekend and gamble responsibly.
Thank you, Tristan. Another thing, I've got a lot of positive feedback from you guys from the recap, and the feedback was ignore the trolls. It's a hard one for me because I want to be transparent, so I want to face criticism. So when I get criticism, I want to talk about it. But I don't want to waste my time constantly doing that, and I'm wasting yours as well because it's your listening time. Plus, my energy can go into more like providing sharp insight, at least I hope. So I'm going to really try and focus on that. I do care what you guys think because this pod wouldn't be possible if there weren't thousands of people tuning in each week. So I appreciate you guys. So I hear that feedback, and I will do a better job of ignoring the trolls because obviously we've had a couple of rough weeks, but that's very natural. That's very normal in a course of a 12-week season. To have only two, slightly dry weeks is not bad at all. There is another challenge apart from the new rules that I'm faced with every week, or every punter is, and that's the number of player withdrawals. So the system, as you guys probably know it, the teams get listed 1 to 17 on Tuesday with 4 reserves. Then they've got to drop 2 of those reserves on the match eve. And that leaves them up to 2 still possibilities to cover injuries. I get all that, and then finalize the teams an hour before kickoff. But I really believe some of these teams are gaming the system, and they know on Tuesday a specific player is not going to play or is going to play, but they don't want to help their opponent prep. So they're not naming a fully accurate 1 to 17. And we've suffered from that, and I talked about that in the recap. But 2 weeks ago, you lose Sean Johnson from the team you had a best bet on. Last week, you lose Bradman Best from the team you had a best bet on. So that is a real challenge for me, but I have to just navigate it as best I can, going through and understanding key players can be ruled out on either side, can go your way and also can go against you. And one of the big culprits of doing this kind of pulling the wool over our eyes, I believe, is the Storm. And we start there with the Broncos hosting the Storm, and the Storm are a 20.5-point favourite. Broncos get back Herbie Farnworth, which is a big inclusion in the outside backs. Milf gets is it a third chance at this point in time because Gamble is suspended. Matt Lodge is out suspended. They're still missing Ricky, and remember, lost Carrigan. So lost quite a few key forwards in the last 3 weeks. And you look at the Broncos forward pack. Haas is super talented for sure. TPJ's actually had a pretty strong season. But I've always said this Broncos' strength is their forward pack. And I do think it's starting to get stretched a little bit thin with these outs. And in the back line, still no sign of Katoni Staggs. I can't remember reading if there was an injury setback with him. But we'll look at the Storm team. They do have injury setbacks, although they are fortunate enough to return Jerome Hughes to halfback. So Cooper John slides out of the side. But just to remind you, still no Pappy. Mind you, Nico Hines is flying. No Munster, of course, but Lewis had actually a great game at 5'8" last week. No Harry Grant, but Brandon Smith would start for most clubs. So you've got awesome players that are out, but you've still got quite good cover by the Storm, who have won 8 straight weeks, 13 plus. Quite crazy. They're also still missing Kenny Bromwich, but in terms of forward stocks, like you've got guys like Nelson, Tui Kamithami. Jeez, I've bundled that. In terms of forward, you've got Kenny Bromwich still out, but the pack is still very strong. When the likes of Nelson and Big Tui on the bench, then it's still close to an international forward pack. Now, if I review the previous matchup, because these sides have already met in 2021, I did play Brisbane plus 20.5. I think it must have been about round 4 down in Melbourne. So now you've got plus 20.5 at home. Both these teams are thinner, both missing a couple of key players on each side. So should I automatically take Brisbane plus 20.5? Well, not necessarily, because of how that match played out. I got taught a bit of a lesson trusting Brisbane in that one. After getting an early lead, they utterly capitulated. That was, of course, the Pappenhausen blitz, 4 tries in 15 minutes. And although he's not playing, we've seen they haven't really missed much of a beat. And we know that the Storm owns Brisbane. They've beaten them 30 plus the last 3 matches, and the record going for the last few seasons has been so strong. And it's basically a second home for the Storm playing at Suncorp. So in saying all that, I still would have to play Brisbane with the points or pass. Brisbane aren't completely hopeless, are they? I mean, they did beat the Roosters by 16 points or so last week. But let's dive a little bit deeper into Brisbane's 3 wins so far this season. You beat the Dogs at home. Dogs are 1 from 11, and no one's impressed by that. You beat the Titans. A game they were down 22-0. Now, props that they came back. But I think people forget they took an intercept try at a really key moment in that game just after half-time that swung the momentum, and they ultimately rode that to a win. And they did basically the identical thing against the Roosters. I talked in the recap about how I don't think Brisbane wins without that intercept length of the field try when they were under the pump to put their noses in front on the stroke of halftime last week. So what I'm getting at is Brisbane better not be complacent, because on top of the sin bins that they really benefited from last week, they're kidding themselves if they think that their problems are solved because they won last week. If things had gone a little bit differently, they could have still lost to the Roosters, they could have lost to the Titans, and they'd be the same ladder position as the Dogs right now. So on one hand, Brisbane's squad will come in upbeat, but they're such a different level to the Storm, and I think they may actually be a little bit overrated and a little bit fat, drunk and happy off such a good win last week. I don't trust the defense of Milford or Kelly, and I think the Storm can exploit them. If you like Brisbane, I would suggest playing plus 10.5 first half. At least you're halving the amount of time that you've got to sweat. You're taking a bit more of the worst fatigue out of the equation because you're only dealing with first half. We have seen that in a couple of Storm games where they haven't covered first half, but then they've steamrolled second half. I just couldn't quite get there for a best bet, so I'm staying out of it. Although I also was tempted to go unders. Again, you just have to trust the Broncos mentality. I'm just not quite there yet. Let's move to the the early game Friday now, where the Cowboys host the Warriors, a very interesting one at QBC, and the Warriors are slight road favourites, -1.5. The Cowboys are going to be missing Taumalolo, Lockie Bird, Lemuelu. Hess is back in, as is the Hammer. But obviously the key one there being the loss of Taumalolo. We know how important he is, but there probably is something to be said for the fact they've played a number of games this season without him, including games they've actually won without him. So it's not like they've shown that they're not utterly hopeless without Taumalolo, but you'd much rather him be there. For the Warriors, they're actually naming Walsh at starting fullback, but it's the same 17 that pulled a great win last week against West, and the reason I call it a great win is because they were down a man and down points late in the game, scored twice with 12 men to pull that win out. And I've got to be honest as well, I don't feel I've had a good read on many Cowboys games this season, if any, even though overall we've done really well in the best bets. It's like I was on the Cowboys in Magic Round, we lost that handicap by 0.5 point, and then I was against them last week and we lost as well. And I recall, of course, this is a rematch as well. New Zealand played North Queensland in Gosford. Must have only been 4 or 5 weeks ago. I remember staying away, and it ended up landing basically right on the number. I think New Zealand won 24-20 after jumping to an early lead. So it was anybody's game, and for sure it's anybody's game again here on Friday. And the Warriors' biggest issue, because I think they're quite talented, is their consistency. But it's like when the Warriors toss up a bad performance in there once every kind of 3 or 4 weeks, everyone says, well, that's what you get. They're struggling. Like they're playing this whole season away from home. In fact, it was only meant to be the first 2/3 of the season, but I think it's been confirmed now they're going to have to spend the whole of 2021 in Australia. So it's like that. It's a Warriors team that you know what they're capable of, but you cannot always be sure that they're going to take it onto the road. In saying that, I do believe New Zealand is stronger than the Cowboys on paper, and clearly the bookies agree with that because New Zealand are favourites in Townsville. But again, let's be fair to the Cowboys. On paper, they don't really impress me against many teams, but that's part of the mastery of Peyton. I think he's getting more than the sum of the parts here. You've got Valentine Holmes is playing better every week. Murray Tuilagi, legit weapon out on the wing. Drinkwater playing for his future. Robson has moments. Some unheralded back rowers there in Shane Wright and Mitch Dunn. They're pretty handy. So maybe on paper the Cowboys don't look that good, but maybe that's just because the Cowboys are underrated. So it's, of course, as I say quite often with these type of teams, these are such huge games because it could ultimately decide who makes the top 8. I really do think both these sides will be on the fringe, and it's always bigger to beat somebody who's going to be right around the same ladder position as you. So I ultimately see this game as a 50-50 with edges going both ways, therefore not strong enough confidence to land on either for a best bet. Moving to the later game Friday night, the Tigers host the Dragons, and the Dragons are a 5.5 point underdog. That's right, 14th is favourites over 6th in round 12. The Tigers lose BJ, but James Roberts returns. He'll be on the wing. At least that's the way it's named. I wouldn't be surprised if he did swap with Tommy Talau there. For the Dragons, they lose Josh Kerr. They do get back Tarek Sims. And I said last week, with their 5 key outs, I thought Tarek Sims was the biggest loss of the 5. So it's a big inclusion now to get him back. And they certainly didn't disgrace themselves last week. Now, both these teams, Tigers and Dragons, were underdogs on Friday last week and both in a position to win their respective matches. and couldn't close it out and suffered pretty heartbreaking defeats. So how they both rebound is obviously the key for this one. Let's also remember it's another rematch, and the Tigers got an upset over the Dragons again about 4 or 5 weeks ago. And in that game, the Tigers were an 8.5 point underdog. Now they're a 5.5 point favourite. So that's a big adjustment going on here. And it's quite similar for me to the New Zealand Cowboys match, where I think there is something to be said for it's hard to beat a team twice in a short span of time when you're not just significantly better. It's not just as simple as, well, Dragons will go into this game with revenge on their minds, but it's like when you lost, you've got adjustments that you can make. Obviously things that didn't work, or seeing how the other side beat you last time. I'd always feel that gives an edge to the team that lost the previous matchup. That's why I would have to lean to the Dragons. Just couldn't quite pull the trigger because, again, I do think that before their bye week, I believe, next week is a split round, so I can't remember if they're on the bye next week or the week after, but this is getting into must-win territory for both sides. And I do think with the outs, the Tigers probably slightly do have the edge and could get on top here, so I didn't pull the trigger for a best bet. Panthers Bulldogs on Saturday afternoon, and the line is 35.5, which is the highest line I've ever seen. And let's be realistic, nobody's really going to pick the Dogs to win. So I guess whether you want to bet on this line, all you got to ask yourself is, how many do I think Penrith's going to win by? And it's probably pretty reasonable to think it will be in that vicinity. So you've heard my best bet, which is the no try, which is there to be a try in the first 8 minutes. So time of first try 0 to 7.59, $1.82 lads and Neds. In terms of the personnel, Edwards is still out. He was scratched last week. That moves Critter to fullback, Momirovski to centres. Kurt Capewell is also out suspended. For the Dogs, Hetherington is back. And let's mind you, this is his first game back with the new rules. Can you imagine if he loses his head? If the Bulldogs were to suffer an early send-off against the Panthers in this one, I'd like to know what the record highest margin of victory in NRL history is, because it would be in jeopardy if the Dogs lose a man early in this one. They do also get back Josh Jackson, and Tapine is also back in this team, while they lose Chris Smith and Katoa. And DWZ has a foot injury, but they've said he is expected to play. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in the Dogs dressing room as they build up for this game. I'd love to know what Baz actually says to his team. Can he look them in the eye and tell them they're any chance in this one? I think you can get 26, 30 to 1 about the Dogs head-to-head, but I wouldn't really recommend it. Going to take a side note here and talk about Origin, because Origin's on my mind looking at a lot of these games, because we're getting to the point where the teams are going to be selected, and that one signature performance could make or break someone's inclusion in Origin. Now, Latrell was very ordinary in his return last week from suspension for the Bunnies against Penrith. And why is that important? Because I think a lot of people had him penciled in at left centre with the form that he had previously to being suspended, as well as what he's done in the past. He knows how to play that position. So when you pick an Origin team, and I'm talking about New South Wales here, obviously you want to pick the best players, but there's also that argument of not picking players out of position, which would go against Latrell now that he's a fullback, and it would go against a Whiten now that he's 5'8", right? So the question I've got for you guys is, who's going to be the left centre for New South Wales? And there's also a strong argument for picking combinations and picking as many players as you can that play club football together. We've seen Queensland kind of built a dynasty on that. So obviously I'm talking about this Penrith team going historically good. We know Isaiah Yeo's going to be there. We know Cleary's going to be there. So where do you draw the line? Like, Damien Cook's probably the best 9, but is Coruscant much worse? Would you pick Coruscant because you're going to have Cleary? And in all likelihood, I think Luai would be the favourite to play 6. And what about this? Matt Burton off a hat-trick in Dubbo last weekend playing left centre. Are there many left centres gone around in better form than Burton? And he's got all the combination with all these guys, and they're probably going to pick Brian To'o as the left winger. So am I crazy to suggest that you could have a play where it goes Coruscant to Cleary to Yeo to Luai to Burton to To'o in the Origin team, and basically just pick the Penrith side, but slot in Teddy and Turbo and Addo-Carr? It's interesting to think about. I'd love to know what you guys reckon. But in all seriousness, I bring that up because I think these Panthers players are still hungry to put their best foot forward every week and keep themselves in the Origin selection conversation. Let's also mention this Panthers-Dogs game is a rematch. These two met in round 2. Panthers won very convincingly, 24-0, and it was very wet conditions. So I've talked about how when I see a line this high, my instinct as a sharp punter is you got to take the plus. But I've also admitted in the recap last week, your instinct just has to go out the window with these Panthers games because this team is so good that it defies regular thinking. That's why I tried to think a little bit outside the box with my best bet. Let me know what you guys reckon about it. Pretty interesting game coming up after that on Saturday. The Rabbitohs host the Eels and the line is plus 2.5 with the Eels being the underdogs. Both sides very disappointing last week on Sunday. Obviously, the Rabbitohs got flogged, and that was my best bet with them catching plus 10.5. They needed, about plus 40.5 to be close. And the Eels were favourites over a converted try and lost by 20 or so points to Manly. And Tristan touched on premiership odds, and this Rabbitohs, the Eels are still third and fourth favourites. But Manly are nipping at their heels, and the only reason Manly aren't short of favourites, if you want to kind of look at all these teams and wonder how good they all are relatively, is because we know how important it is to be in the top four, and the Rabbitohs and Eels already have a lot more points on the board, more likelihood of still finishing above Manly, and that would make Manly's pathway to the premiership harder. But Tristan did also tell me when I just followed up on that video that in terms of how good these teams are seen right now, they have, from an odds-making perspective, Rabbitohs, Eels, and Manly all virtually level. So I'd love to know what you guys reckon as well. Like, I think my instinct is that Rabbitohs and Eels are both still a little bit better than Manly, which I know sounds crazy because Manly beat the Eels last week, but the Broncos beat the Roosters last week. Nobody thinks the Broncos are better than the Roosters. So it's not as simple as last week, but we'll get to Manly because, as you know, I've bet against them this week. This is still a super intriguing matchup with these two teams. Obviously not the level of Penrith and Melbourne, but they're right there, still most likely going to be finishing top four. And as I said, the Eels lost by 20 last week. The Rabbitohs conceded 50 plus for the second time in a month. But they do get back Cam Murray, which is a huge inclusion, while the Eels lose Regan Campbell-Gillard. He's suspended. So I critiqued my pick on the Bunnies last week enough as it is, but here's a conspiracy thought I'm going to add as well. The thought that came to me that conspiracy theorists will like, right? Okay, South Sydney, how do they succeed this year? I think nothing less than making the grand final is going to be a success for them. They've got a pretty quality roster. They were preseason favourites. They've lost 3 straight prelims. So Bennett is the mastermind. He knows how to get a team to the grand final in the first week of October. He wants his team to be fresh, healthy, and peaking into September. I actually think Bennett is smart enough to know that there are benefits to his team being in a form slump in May, because right before the Origin teams get picked, if your team is in a form slump, you're less likely to have a bunch of players selected for Origin, which not only keeps your players out of the most grueling, physically and mentally taxing games of the year, but makes them hungrier to perform better as well. So that's super kind of tinfoil hat. Would Bennett deliberately not be, I guess, priming his troops to play their best footy this month, with really playing chess while other teams are playing checkers? And that would be a reason why you wouldn't want to be on the Bunnies. And yeah, I only thought of that after I backed them last week. I wish I'd thought of that maybe a week ago. That's going to keep me off the Bunnies here, even though I think they are the better team. I think these two teams are very evenly matched, but you've got to remember the Eels are still without Dylan Brown as well, and they did miss him last week, and I mentioned RCG missing from the forward pack, whereas Rabbitohs for me essentially are full strength. And I just keep thinking about the Rabbitohs right to left attack. You know how deadly they are going right to left, even though it didn't look that way against Penrith last week. Penrith's going to make everyone look bad. But the Eels have gotten back Wonga Blake at right centre. How on earth is he going to help stop that Rabbitohs attack? So I would definitely lean Rabbitohs. I was super close to playing them as a best bet, but I just wonder going into the bye whether they want to show everything or whether in some sick way it benefits them to not play great and to then motivate the squad to work hard into the bye. And then I wouldn't be surprised at all, even if Rabbitohs lost here and a few people write them off, that might be where they go on a run. So maybe I'm overthinking it, but it just couldn't quite get me there for value on a best bet. Moving to the Roosters hosting the Raiders. Well, sorry, they're not really hosting. It's on a neutral venue ground in Gosford, and the line is Raiders plus 11.5. You're not going to believe this, but Radley got suspended after all the incidents last week. J-Moz swapped straight back into the team for Suwali. He did not disgrace himself in his performance. I think they're just playing it safe with a 17-year-old body to back up. Plus, you've got to play J-Moz. Angus Crichton was also suspended. So that's 2 big losses for the Roosters. The Raiders lose George Williams, which I'm sure you've heard about in the news this week. They do get back Jack Whiten, Hodgson, Rapana. Now, the one thing I'll touch on with the Williams story is, of course, then he put on Instagram that it wasn't his fault and the club has kicked him out. And someone then, a shout out, I can't remember the name of the bloke who messaged me and said, look, basically the whole Raiders squad has liked George Williams' Instagram post. So if he attacks the club and all the players are on his side, then again, you have to question what the mentality of this Raiders squad is. So that's gone a bit of a deep dive, but I think this can be something to that sometime. You go back last week to the Raiders' performance. They were up 10-0 at home against the Storm, who didn't have their starting 1, 6, 7, and 9, and then got outscored 34-0. And I still can't fully explain how the Raiders managed to fall apart like that. And when you see performances that are so uncharacteristic and things you can't explain, it's where you really do start to question, are there more things going on beneath the surface? So I've given the Raiders a lot of credit for that huge win that they got in Magic Round against the Dogs, but let's look at it kind of devil's advocate. They should have lost that, and if they'd lost that one, we'd be talking about a Raiders team that has won 1 from their last 9. So on one hand, you're looking at Raiders gaining 2 pivotal players, Roosters losing 2 pivotal players, Roosters not at home, but I still can only play the Chooks because I actually way more confident they're going to be resolute after that loss last week. They've got more class than the outside backs. Yes, Sam Walker had kind of a bring back down to earth match last week, but it was interesting the comments made by Robbo, which was that he's definitely been considering resting Walker. So it's almost as if he acknowledged he could see a poor performance coming. You got to remember, not only is the kid 18, young playmaker in this league with a lot of responsibility, but he is a very small frame by NRL standards to be putting through the rigors of the game. So even Robbo admitting that he could foresee some struggles by Sam Walker. On the other hand, there's another halfback called Sam Williams, who comes in for the Raiders, and that's a plus for them because he's experienced and he actually is one of the best backup halves in the comp. So plus you sprinkle in a little bit of rivalry. Raiders had their best chance to win the comp since 92, taken away by the Roosters, and I don't know when the Raiders are going to get another chance, just looking at everything that's kind of gone wrong since then. So it's just so variable what kind of performance the Raiders are going to toss out in this one. I feel like if you want to back the Raiders, you almost back them for the upset because they're either going to be bang up for it and make a game of it and be in it, or they're not, and then plus 11.5 won't be enough points. I don't have a best bet on this, but I do think the Roosters could be comprehensively too good for the Raiders, so I'm actually going to use it as the first part of the mixed matchup, but I'll touch on the mixed matchup when I get to that game. Let's move to Sunday. The Sharks play the Titans at another neutral venue game, Coffs Harbour, which is right around halfway between the two clubs. Hiroti, Dugan and Wilton are all suspended. Townsend is dropped, but they bring into the team Mulatalo, Talakai, Ramian, and Fafita, and Sean Johnson as well. There's a Fafita returning for the Titans too, David Fafita, which is obviously massive, and Herbert comes back from injury. So this is the first game in quite a while, I think over a month, that the Titans playing their full strength pack. And I was singing the praises of a Fodawaker. So now you got the big 3 Fs in Fodawaker, Fafita, and Fasumala'awi all on the park together. That's a huge challenge for the Sharks. However, in some games where I thought that, a big forward pack advantage should lay the platform for the victory, what I have noticed in 2021 is some of these teams that don't have a forward pack edge, they spread the game out more, they play the game faster, and then you're testing the mobility of teams forwards rather than just the power. And I'm sure that the Sharks will try to do that. And I actually do lean to the Sharkies. I really think now that Sean Johnson is meant to return this week, when he, was after being withdrawn a couple of times in the last couple of weeks, Sean Johnson to Sharks is not like a turbo magnitude of importance to Manly, but it is similar. I see similarities there in how Sean Johnson really elevates the guys around him, and for that reason, off the back of a confidence-boosting win, that kind of lucky win theory where you scraped out a win you didn't necessarily deserve, so you get the confidence from the win, but you get no complacency whatsoever. I think that I would be taking the Sharks with the points in this one as my, if I was betting on it, and in fact I got really close, but ultimately the Titans getting a scare last week against Dogs, I kind of feel the same way about them. They won't be complacent either, and Fafita truly will be a big boost. So I could see this one going either way, just kept me off it for a best bet. But as you know, I do have a couple of best bets on the final game of the round, Knights hosting Manly. And the prevailing line is minus 11.5 with a little bit of juice to the favourite. But I'm taking a best bet, Knights plus 12.5, which, as I said, 12 or 12.5 is on 4 different bookies, a Unibet, Ladbrokes, Neds, and TopSport. And Manly Seagulls team total under $32.5.80 on Bet365. And you've got to be a bit brave to take anything related to a total under. But I just can't see the Knights coming out and giving up that many points at home in what is absolutely a must-win game for them. And they've got the confidence of getting Ponga and Best back in the team and Mann shifting to a more natural position in 5/8. Curtis Sirenen is a good inclusion for Manly as well. And this is not a knock on Manly. This is just simply me kind of planting my flag and saying, I think that the Knights are not utterly hopeless. And I think off a 10-day turnaround at home versus Manly off a 7-day, they can compete in this game. They're just not as far away. And the biggest edge that Manly has over most teams is Tom Trbojevic. The truth is, you got the Queensland fullback and Callum Ponga, who is not that much worse than Turbo, and is equally, his team relies on him and looks to him, and he can make things happen for the Knights as well. And that's why I actually anticipate a really quality game of footy on Sunday. So I'll be taking the points, and I'll be taking Manly under. And because this was my most confident play of the 8, and I looked long and hard at the maul, I'm going to use this in the mixed matchup as well, and I'm going to play the Knights to outscore the Raiders at $2.25. You can have up to $200 on that on TopSport. Now, we used the Knights last week. They didn't even have Ponga and Best, and they still managed 4 tries up in North Queensland, and that was enough for us to win the mixed matchup at $3.50. So let's go back to the well again. Now they get to play at home with those stars back. Now, albeit clearly against a more stout opposition. But the way I look at it is the Knights and the Raiders are both right around plus 12 underdogs. And I've got way more confidence in the Knights making a close game versus what I do with the Raiders, as I touched on with their matchup against the Roosters. And the thing is as well, I just really think the Roosters will rebound from that poor performance against the Broncos and control the match and won't leak a lot of soft tries for sure. So I think even if the Raiders make a close game of it against the Roosters, I think then it would definitely trend to an under. I don't see Raiders-Roosters being a shootout by any means. It's also the Saturday night game. And I do love in our mixed matchup when we get to play one team playing in daytime conditions, which is the Knights here at home, versus another team playing nighttime conditions. It gives us a slight edge. Both of these teams, Knights and Raiders, are anticipated to score right around 18 points, so it is right around a 50-50, but I like it the Knights way, and we're getting $2.25. Let me know what you reckon of that one, as well as all your thoughts for round 12, what you agree with, what you don't. Thank you for tuning in. As always, it's very hard to win money long-term on the punt. It's quite easy to lose money on the punt, so always gamble responsibly, and Lego.